Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Before we kick off about the return of context, was it always better than the cookie? Let's do a brief round of introductions. Fiona, I'm going to start with you, please.
Hi, Fiona from Captify. We are, one of the guys introduced us yesterday actually, but we're the largest search intelligence business outside the walled gardens, and we just launched our search-powered contextual product earlier this year.
Wonderful, thank you. Rob.
I'm Rob Bradley from CNN. I'm joint head of ad sales for international, but also run the digital and data development for the business.
Hi everyone, Nick Flood from Future PLC. I run the global commercial operations division of the business. We're a big multi-platform publisher, 300 million users, and also own some interesting brands like Go Compare as well.
Oh yes, you do own Go Compare. I forgot that minor detail, absolutely. I want to, from a context perspective, Rob and Nick, I want to understand what context means to you both as publishers, kind of how you organise yourselves around context and I guess content as it pertains to context. Rob, I'll start with you, please.
I mean, context for us means, obviously when you're thinking in consideration of advertisers, is making sure that there's some relevancy with what the user is reading and what they're experiencing around them, whether that is an ad, which obviously in its most simple form is a banner, or whether that for us is often some sort of mechanism to get people to watch some sort of content. We're really at CNN in the business of going out to market, working with brands very closely, very deeply, understanding the stories they want to tell, and then all of our campaigns, the vast majority are linked to some sort of branded content or sponsored content. The main sort of area of discussion, therefore, when you think of it from CNN, is often around context going into brand suitability, brand safety, and making sure that that context and the content or the ad is hitting the user when they're genuinely interested or engaged in that content. But CNN has hard news, it has business, it has sport, travel, style, a number of different areas. And, we're in a world where obviously brands, all trying to stand for something as well. And whether that's impact in some way sustainability, diversity, inclusion, climate, obviously COP26 this week, all brands want to get aligned with it. So being at a news provider, it's actually quite challenging sometimes because they want to stand for something, but often they don't necessarily want to be around content which is talking about that subject. So for us, often when you're talking about context, you start getting into suitability of content. So we really think about context and sentiment together, about brand suitability, positive and negative sentiments around content, so that you're not just out there blocking all content around diversity and inclusion by using some blunt keywords. You actually, the things you're supporting, you're getting into context at the right time with content that's relevant and not blocking.
Interesting. And Nick, from your perspective, it's probably very different because obviously Future is set up very, very differently in terms of the content you have people have access to.
Yeah, totally. And it's okay?
You now have two microphones. I'm not sure which one's working.
Okay. It's interesting we're still talking about it as well. I think publishers have done this well for 15 years, and it's still a hot topic, which is really weird. So I think publishers' contextual environments, brand safe areas and whatnot, that's our lifeblood. And we've been going to agencies and clients for many years, talking about the virtues of advertising against context and the correct kind of content, right? And it does, quite frankly, work. Of course, you can have an offer and layer on audience targeting and various other capabilities that I'm sure a lot of publishers have, or agencies or clients want to enact, but context is where I think publishers' heartland is, and we definitely put a lot of time and energy into it. So we have our own machine learned solution that kind of drives contextual signals that can obviously be passed into the ad server, but we definitely spend a lot of time talking about it and have done for many years.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, obviously, publishers have been talking about it for ages, and then this is true, and it's saying it's still a top topic. It's become even more of a hot topic because of the actions of certain big companies recently, of course. Yeah. And actually, you're saying that, context for you has always worked. I think, Fiona, you're going to exactly agree as well from Captify's stance. Yeah, I'm going to preempt this already. But, Fiona, do you think that, were cookies just all a load of bollocks in the first place? Were we kind of led to believe that they were the answer to being able to effectively advertise, and actually was context always better?
Yeah, I think like anyone in the ad tech industry already knew the shortcomings of cookies the entire time. But I mean, the fundamentals are, everyone's been talking about it all week. cookies only ever worked in digital in the first place anyway. It was like you've got loads of other advertising environments that were never cookie based, so you always needed something else to be advertising effectively in those environments like out of home, television, CTV, etc. So to us, context works in any advertising environment, not just in digital. So of course, if you're as a media buyer trying to hit the same sort of audience across multiple different avenues, then context is the best place to start. And frankly, from our perspective, I came from a publisher background too, so I already knew that context worked, but the real proof is in the pudding for us that it outperforms cookie-based solutions. And we've done the benchmarking consistently for the last 3 quarters, and it absolutely outperforms cookies, period. Cookies and IDs.
Outperforms in what way? Like, what are the benchmarks? What are people looking for?
So if you're going head-to-head and measuring against things like CTRs, VTRs, etc., CPL, CPC, it's outperforming on every measure, but also on viewability. Because inherently, when you do context, most advertisers will pre-apply all of their brand safety and ad fraud targets, so they'll put exclusion lists in. So when you're doing that, you don't have the same cookie drop-off that you have when you're trying to sync into a DSP or an SSP, which means the reach is there, they know what the reach is, they know roughly what they're going to have to pay for it, and so it just delivers. And we sort of did literally benchmark after benchmark against a bunch of, and it's not just us, there's other contextual providers that will tell you exactly the same thing. It just works. So why would you consider flogging the dead horse when you don't need to?
Can I just add something to that? Because I think like we're talking about context, we should talk about cookies, we're talking about reaching people, and we're talking about reaching people in a way that engages them. So when we're thinking about context and going back to that argument around like understanding our content, who's the expert at that content? It's CNN. We're the expert at that content.
Yeah.
So we can understand that content deeply, obviously use tools that enables us to understand the sentiment, subject matter, of course, but it's about unlocking engaged people, right? So if you're unlocking engaged people, using cookies often about a past activity isn't necessarily going to be the best way.
Yeah.
You can do it in real time, really understanding what they're engaged, understanding the full sentiment of the content they're reading. You're talking about an engaged person, and then you're talking about somehow delivering that ad or piece of content that's delivered through an experience that takes them to that content. We're talking about getting a person engaged in the right place.
And that's why publishers do so well, right? And today, even now, after so long, we're still getting £100,000 direct IO campaigns because agencies and clients know that publishers can unlock that audience. So if that wasn't the case and it didn't actually work, then everything would just be cookie purchase, right, on the open web. So I think that's a big piece. And then secondly, with GoCo, GoCompare, GoCo Limited, as we talk about it internally, it's a top 10 media spender, I think, with Google in the UK. But we heavily rely on context, but also the audience buy as well. And to your point, it does work and does perform. It outperforms some of the other kind of more standard kind of open web activity.
Yes, I know GoCo are a very high spender because I used to work on more than paid search, and GoCo was a pain in our backside. Yeah, absolutely. But do advertisers not want access to your rich wealth of first-party data? Don't they want to target people that way? Do they actually want to target contextually against your content?
Well, yes, and you can do it. You can do it all. And that's like if we have a product called CNN AIM, right? We launched it 6 years ago, and a lot of it then was built off frequency and recency of these keywords and how many articles they've read and segments basically, and of course feeding third-party data into it as we could. They're obviously quite different today with GDPR and all the regulations globally, but the brand is still the same, CNN AIM. We talk about the people again. If you want to reach a C-suite decision maker or a person in government, or we have those segments available, and we talk about the people, and underneath it, the technology from 6 years ago is just completely different. So we have consistency in messaging around what our brand is, who you're reaching, but underneath today, of course, we're using context as part of segmentation where we can, where we're still meeting GDPR, but then third party as well where we can, and having partnerships with people like ID5. We've built our own sentiment sort of technology as well, our own content engagement platform. Because again, going back to we understand our audience, we understand our content, but of course we can marry all these things together.
Also,
it's a layering piece, right? So we charge more the more activation that a client or agency want. So it starts generally with context, and then it'll move into audiences, and then kind of interactions, and just listening to the commerce piece on the panel before. Future transacts through retailers, affiliate partners, about £1 billion worth of transactions on a yearly basis. So we are a big player in that space, and as a great example, we can start to feed that through to an ad campaign, right? To allow targeting through Aperture, our customer data platform. So I think a lot of it is about bringing clients up from a publisher perspective out of the open web programmatic channels, low yielding, not really that great, right, up the waterfall. And that's kind of our core strategy. That's what we try and do. So specifically looking at blocking people, moving them into premium programmatic, so PMP and PG, and then into online creative solutions where the real money is, right? And that's our kind of stated goal from an ad perspective.
I would also say, Lindsay, like brands are moving. Is that me? Or somebody else? Oh no. Brands have moved spend already because they're concerned themselves about data privacy, full stop, and they want to try all different types of products to get that spend. Already 50% of all of our revenue is contextual, search-powered contextual. So
50%?
50%. So clients clearly want to buy it, and a lot of them are also concerned about the ID going away as well. So they want to know what else is out there, what other options do I have for activation, which is great from a publisher standpoint. But they're also looking for, like in the old school way that we talked about contextual, a lot of the original contextual providers were very much, it came from a place of brand safety, ad fraud measurement, that kind of thing. Now they're looking for stuff that not only works, but also gives them a different skew on what's happening. So to the kind of comments that the e-commerce panel was making earlier, the reason we put search signals in there is because it gives you a better indication as to why someone would be looking at that content. So it's not just about landing them on a page that's a relevant ad to that piece of content, it's also what were they looking for before they got to that ad, before they got to that page, and trying to kind of feed more information back both ways to make sure that you're constantly updating that sort of classification. Because it's the classification of the content that's really critical to be done in a timely fashion and get people to the right pages at the right time to influence the decision making. So it's definitely and brands are buying, they're moving their money now. It's not something that's going to happen in the future, they're already spending.
When did this shift start? When 50% of your revenue now is off cookieless?
I think
how long has that been going on for?
I think that's been going sort of, even before we launched our product, people were already testing stuff. But I think you've definitely seen much more of a shift over the last 2 quarters as the cookie deadline is looming. But also, as you're having conversations with the brands themselves, they're already thinking about cross-platform activation. So they're not just thinking about how do I get this running on a digital environment. They want to know how you can do it in CTV, in out-of-home, wherever. So they're much more engaged in the entire concept of context generally, rather than just, I need an identifier to make that work. You're just like, well, what else could we potentially be doing in this space?
And I want to talk about measurement, and it was brought up in the previous panel, kind of the whole CPM, I'm going to say argument, because it was a bloody argument, quite a funny one. But from a measurement perspective, with brands looking a lot more from an outcomes basis and wanting to work with you guys kind of to understand they can deliver outcomes and ultimately affect their bottom line, while also remembering they're trying to speak to a human at the end of an ad. Are metrics like CPM pointless now? Like, is branding still something relevant that people need to look at? Like, should they be looking at things beyond that? Why does CPM still remain relevant, and can it remain relevant as a context measurement tool?
I mean, at the end of the day, you're still going to have brand advertising, because for someone to want to buy your product in the first place, you need to tell them about it in the first place. So there's, the upper funnel kind of brand awareness, brand lift type of stuff. But now people are asking for other attention metrics, which is obviously big for publishers, and also things like for us, people ask us about share of search all the time, like what happened when my ad was there? Did people start searching on the product? Have they gone and done anything else relevant to the experience? So I 100% disagree. CPM is always going to be there because brand advertising is not going away. Could it be better integrated with e-commerce downstream? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's not one or the other. As a marketer, you've got to be able to do both. So there's going to be demand for different types of measurement in this space for sure. And to me, it's sort of, you'll never get rid of brand measurement, because that is ultimately what the brand is trying to do, is get people to understand who they are, know where to find them, and then go buy the product.
Yeah. If you're going to pick on something, pick on CTR.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Like
seriously.
Does. It's a proxy metric for what they want.
Exactly. I remember being the first digital employee at a company 15 years ago, and it was CTR was the metric then. Yes, we were selling CPMs then, but forget about CPM. think of that as a charging metric. Think of that as a way of charging. Like,
Exactly.
70% of what we sell touches our brand studio, right? It's a full service creative studio around the world. And then, the other portion, huge amount, touches sponsorship. So when we're talking to a brand, yes, we're like reassuringly expensive. It's big campaigns, often multi-market. Like, the CPM is like, yes, that's discussed, but it's more we're talking about the whole budget. And the outcomes we're looking at are really linked to the power of CNN's audience, which is really what we're outselling. Power of the audience, the trust of the content, the fact that if you're on CNN, it means something to certain people, i.e., they come to us to learn about what they're going to talk about at the dinner table. It could be people looking at changing the way they're running their business, policymakers in government or at NGOs, and it could just be someone with a high spending power. They're looking to reach that power of the audience. So for us, it's about getting a story to those people that cuts through a very cluttered internet space, and those 3 letters of CNN, they cut through. And then it's about really using metrics way beyond CTR, which of course, is around engagement, whether it's, of course, viewability is still super important. Yeah. We may be serving ads and charging for ads, but the content is really what they're after. So, of course, views, time spent, sharing, emotional response. There's huge amounts of things that we feed back on. And more importantly, we're learning from all of those things and feeding that into the next campaign so that they're just getting smarter and smarter and smarter.
I think publishers have a very good toolbox now to drive outcomes, and that's ultimately what clients or agencies want. And totally agree. Like, CTR is just meaningless because there's so many other ways to measure an outcome of a campaign, right? And I think at Future we talk a lot to the clients around what are they trying to achieve, and having those discussions, and that's what clients are paying for, right? They're not just sticking all their cash into a DSP and saying, right, see you later, just make it happen. They're having a in-meeting person and a discussion about what they want to try and achieve, and then publishers can craft a proper response for it. So I think that's incredibly important. A lot of people forget about the position of the publishers in that world, and actually the pendulum for me is properly with Google, talking about removing cookie from Chrome, has started to swing the pendulum back a little bit more towards the publishers, having better conversations with agencies about trying to reach a high percentage of endemic audiences with smaller media buys is kind of where I see it going. And let's not forget the cookie's been gone for a long time on certain browsers. Yes. So none of this is new, right? And context, contextual advertising, that's unaffected by that. So of course it's always going to stay. And on the CPM piece, totally agree. It's just a buying metric.
Yeah. Does it not wind you up a bit that you said you've been talking about context for 15 years, and why the advertisers just catching on now?
Yeah.
So if you look at some of the M&A recently and some of the kind of raises, it is quite interesting to see companies that have driven so much on the kind of automation programmatic side now starting to move into context, right? Because they kind of have to, because it's been driven by the large companies in our space, such as Google and what have you. But I think it's just inevitable, and everyone is very keen and desperate to start to understand the context around publisher content. And there are a lot of companies, of course, scraping publisher content, which isn't that great, which not many people know about, to drive their businesses. And of course, it's fine if you have those relationships in place and whatnot. But there's some interesting stuff going on in the industry to try and really understand the contextualization of a page and the user that has visited it.
I think also then, Lindsay, the money's moving around as well. So a lot more money has moved into cookieless environments, and that's why you're starting to see it. But also coming back to the privacy stuff, ultimately, even without the cookie going away, the regulators were already closing in on cross-site tracking and just going, this is not cool, this is not consumer friendly, stuff needs to change in the industry generally. And I think that's when really you've started to see tech providers saying, okay, we can't keep backing into that type of environment. We need to move out of that and move into something that is going to be good for the consumer, but still good for the publisher, good for the buyer, make it a good ecosystem for people to work in, and one that they can trust. There's definitely been plenty of dodge going on in our industry for a long time, and a lot of the creeping...
What do you mean?
Yeah, a lot of the creeping of people around the internet is, that's what led us to the place where the regulators got involved and started to say, right, we're not going to have a cookie. And like I said earlier, we also think that ultimately the ID is going to end up in the same place.
Well,
so
regulators don't love the ID either, do they? So
no, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't at all.
Just to link it, you're really talking about consumer power here, and consumer power is is only going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. There's some, don't quote me exactly on this stat, but it's something like 1 in 3 people in the UK have stopped buying a brand because they don't align with their beliefs.
Yep.
So if you think of
Yeah,
that,
that's becoming huge, yeah.
and then
absolutely.
you put that in the context of, you know, people caring about their privacy more than ever before. These things are all linked to movements of human behavior. So if you think about you being a publisher today or someone that facilitates business in the media industry, a tech company, you know, you really need to start thinking of the context. Okay, well, that consumer power is going nowhere. What do I have that's unique to me? That if Google disappears tomorrow, I'm still okay.
Yeah.
If Facebook disappears tomorrow, I'm still okay. It's still, my mind boggles when I sometimes see. It seems sometimes like the biggest strategy some media's owner have is try and get that 15% back from a tech company because it's a tech tax. It's like, I know there's 50%, and there's companies that will solve that, I think, in the long term. I know there's Alchemy and Block Exchange talking about, you know, there will be some you know, technical kind of solutions for that. But for us, it's like, you know, context was important 15 years ago because it's, you know, we're CNN, and if you're like, okay, we're CNN, so what do we really do? Okay, we tell these stories around the world, and okay, what do brands do? Oh, they want to tell their stories. You know, how can I do it? How can I do that? Whether, you know, cookies disappears tomorrow, IDs could disappear, whatever it is, you know, what is it that I have? What is it that I control and concentrate on my own game, as much as trying to, of course, claw back, you know, try and be outspoken around, you know, some of the challenges where publishers do lose money from the brand getting spent. So, you know, I think it's about focusing on what you have on your core, but doing it in the context that this consumer power is not going anywhere.
It's also interesting, Lizzie, what you touched on earlier, Rob, about particularly this was bad last year, right, in COVID. We saw it ourselves when we were trying to buy more, buy for our clients, that loads of quality news journalism was getting blocked because it was talking about COVID. And that concept of positive and negative sentiments become a lot more important, where just a blunt instrument, we're cutting that off because we don't want people to talk about it. Well, that's kind of half your site, right? And it's not bad content, it's just that the sophistication for analysing that stuff wasn't there, but that tech is now available.
It is, yeah, and you can, exactly, and we can understand why a brand might not want to be alongside certain content on the site, but it's context from 15 years ago has got a lot smarter, is kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
So, you know, we still sell huge TV campaigns, but we obviously don't get as much data from the digital world as we do from them, but the context is you want to be against current affairs. But digitally, of course, we can be much smarter and unlock audiences, basically.
But context, sorry, Nick, you go ahead. I was going to say context has got much smarter, but are many advertisers still guilty of operating kind of in legacy ways? Like, you know,
yes.
Exactly, yeah. Yes. Categorically. Fiona, you just said it yourself, like, you know, they were open letters from publishers saying, please don't use blockless against COVID. You don't understand what the context of the semantics of the article is, and we're having to run house ads because there's no inventory, there's no supply to run. You know what's going on. And I've had conversations with many agencies who claim that no, we don't use blockless anymore. Now I'm going to call bullshit on this because I don't believe that's true for a second. Is that true? Are you still seeing problems with blockless?
Yeah, we are, and they may call them something different, or it may be certain words have been taken off that were put in the limelight by studies and so on. But yes, there is still a huge amount of blocking of context, yet context is one of the biggest discussions. So, you know, obviously being a brand that does cover hard news, it's a particular challenge, but it has got smarter. I think the industry has recognised it. There's more of a conversation rather than it being blunt, but it's definitely not a finished subject by any means. And when you're in a world, I do think this is really important, so I'm going to say it again, you're in a world where brands want to stand for something, you can't move for a brief without something, or an ad without it standing for something, purpose-driven advertising, and then you're linking that to a world where certain things are blocked, or the authenticity of what that story is being told. I know this isn't about ad tech, if that authenticity isn't necessarily really there, you know, then you're going to continue.
And you're news-driven, so that
problems.
makes it even more challenging, right? Because you are news-driven.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, Nick was going to say something, but on that point about the whole diversity and inclusion thing as well, I'm sure that's come up for you guys.
Yeah. Massively. So I would encourage the publishers in the room to definitely look at the block lists or suppression lists or whatever you want to call them. It's just hilarious, some of the words that are still used. And I think a lot of it just comes down to laziness.
Yeah.
It's, I've ticked a box, just copying the file across, right? It just doesn't matter. But the brands that really get it, and like you say, CNN's not going to stop talking about war or crisis or devastation station. It's just that's the news, and it always should do, and cut through that, and you just don't change that content, right? So I think advertisers have got a bit smarter, and there's some really good tech out there, of course, these days. Mantis is really good from Reach, and there's obviously other providers on the market. We've got our own proprietary solution, of course, because that's what Future likes to do.
Naturally.
But it does provide, it does cause challenges always. Every single week I overhear a conversation in the office around we can't get the inventory away because they want to block this word, but they don't understand the impact of it. So where, for me, it would significantly help is more, and I know Mantis is doing this, kind of moving into the agency world a lot more and trying to get the tech into that side, and then you obviously have that crossover, and it just gets a bit smarter, so you can properly talk about sentiment, you can properly talk about feelings and whatnot, not just your, this is an iPhone review, right? Just the most simplistic thing.
We get it all the time, Lindsay. So the blockless thing, it's still absolutely a thing.
Going all the time,
Always.
Absolutely.
But more
Keep
than that,
checking it.
what's
Some of them
really
are 10 years old,
evolved,
not relevant.
Well, the last couple of quarters, what's really evolved for us is because the legislation is changing all the time around what's legal to target. The other thing that we get is diversity and inclusion requests all the time, where people will ask us to proactively target certain racial groups, which is illegal in Europe. And we have to rewrite the brief for the client and say, actually, you can't do that, but what you can do is this. So you can achieve the same result as what you're trying to do with your product without doing those things. Because as a search intelligence provider, we are a strong believer that you don't need to do half the stuff, like age and demo. Actually not that good. And there's
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
I will keep saying it.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should, and it's actually very dangerous in certain environments, and particularly in news, it can be incredibly stupid to do it that way. So we sort of get that all the time from our brands, and we always talk to them about, don't just put a blunt instrument block list in. Let's sit down and have a look at what are you trying to do, and there's some really good inventory over here that you're blocking just because you're using a simple strategy. So yeah, it's definitely not going away.
And Fiona, you mentioned that that there are some clients you work with that actually are going down the context route because they believe there might not even be a future for the ID, and the future of the ID, is potentially questionable in the long term. Are you worried at all? Do you think there could be that people are trying to there could be some kind of cookie replacement, cookie hack that could render all this? People come to context until context becomes rubbish again, and they'll go back to something that enables them to do one-to-one targeting.
I think it's more about their own DPOs internally, right? Their own data protection people, especially the brands, are as concerned about it as everybody in our industry, are just concerned about, look, that's still fine line. You're either fingerprinting or you're still creeping on people based on a user basis. That's still not, it makes them very uncomfortable. So if you're not able to completely obfuscate that and say, actually, you're just going to target content now, as opposed to we're going to target an individual person, that is what makes people uncomfortable, and that's why they're looking at context as a different approach, for sure.
Are we finally at a stage where the consumer is actually driving this, and it is not based on what I am allowed to do or what I can do because of what a regulator says I can do, but it's actually what the consumer is demanding of me?
Yes.
Yeah, and the regulators were behind the consumers, I would almost say. So, and it's, again, like whether IDs go away or something new comes in is don't build your business in a way where if it goes away, you're in trouble. Right? Have it as part of something, learn about it, always embrace new technology, think about where your business is in 2-3 years, not in the next 2 months, because it takes 6 months to sign a contract because of all the going through all these GDPR stuff anyway, and then getting it onboarded. So you're a year behind when you thought it was a good idea by the time you've started anyway.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, that may be particular things we have in our company to get these things signed off, but it's because we're very strict against rules and regulations. So, I think all these things are important. Embrace them while they're here and make them work for you, but also make sure that they can go and it's okay. Yeah.
We're running out of time, but I have one final question for you all. And I want to understand kind of what for you, in your capacity, in kind of where you sit in the industry, is the most important thing about context that you want to see improve or see happen. I mean, Nick, you've said it. You said you've been talking about this for 15 years. You can't understand why we're still on stage talking about it. Yes, why are we on stage talking about it if it's been effective for so long? What do you want to see change, or what do you want to see improve?
I think we're probably on stage talking about it because ad tech have massively got into it in the last couple of years.
Ad tech loves a bandwagon.
Absolutely. Whereas publishers in our WhatsApp groups going, hang on a sec, this is just standard.
Doing.
This is our bread and butter. So that's interesting. I think what needs to start happening is agencies and clients who are spending large sums of money need to realise that it does work, quite frankly, and there are a myriad of different ways to buy media these days. And it's about trial, experimenting, and making sure you are not pigeonholing yourself into one specific area, right? That will never work. And as a publisher, we need to make sure that we are open and working with as many partners as possible to make sure people can buy with us in the easiest way possible. People are lazy. People want to buy, good media from big publishers, but you need to make sure you've just got the right channels. There's a specific job, I think, in and around ID, and just to touch on that one comment, I think school's out at the moment on what's going to happen, and I think the whole industry's got itself into a bit of a mess, and I think it will take a few years to kind of get out of it. I think clean rooms look really interesting, and it'd be interesting over the next couple of years to see how they grow, and future of a product in that space as well. It's just not scalable yet, and it's just going to take a lot of time, and very few people actually understand them and kind of get it. Whereas context is very simplistic, and as a salesperson, it's the first thing you're taught, basically. Right. Sell against the keyword, right? And that's how you build your avails out and kind of take it from there. So context will remain regardless of anything else that kind of goes on in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, your perspective, what's most important for you?
I think about linking it to the bigger picture stuff in the industry around, premium, trusted environments that is fraud-free, that offers an engaged audience. It's all these things are linked. So I think, it's not just pigeonhole it in, okay, this content's relevant for that ad. Like, it's bigger than that. It's part of the whole discussion around some of the biggest challenges that we have.
Thank you very much. Fiona?
I think in line with what these guys said, but also that context works in any environment. And it always has, and all you're trying to do is provide the activation capabilities for people to be able to get access to it. And I agree with Rob on, I think it goes beyond even that. It's actually consumers now are demanding so much better classification of stuff that you can get access to diversity and inclusive audiences and be able to prove that those people are actually consuming content on your sites. Brands want to align themselves with, content that's supporting whatever their particular initiative is, or whatever their kind of hot buttons are around diversity and inclusion, and they also want to know that what they're advertising against is safe, and they are looking to different people to provide that to them. So there is absolutely an appetite for it on the brand side.
And if you aren't sure if context works, speak to these guys, because they're all proving that it does work.
Absolutely.
There we go.
We're spending money on it now. So.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, we're going to end. Thank you so much, Fiona, Rob, and Nick. Round of applause for them, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks,